Welcome to Healthy Kingston, a health promotion and wellness program offered monthly by the Kingston Board of Health. I'm Janet Wade. Before we start our program, I do have one announcement from the Public Health Department, and that is that there will be a flu clinic both in September and October for residents, Wednesday, September 20th and Wednesday, October 18th from 9 to 11 a.m. at the Townhouse in Kingston at 26 Evergreen Street, room 200, the large room on the second floor. Pre-registration is required. This clinic is being done in collaboration with Big Y grocery store, and they're asking that they have a number of people from whom to give the immunization. So we would like people to pre-register, and the number to pre-register is 781-585-0503. And now our topic of concern. Everyone's talking about it these days. Climate change. It's no longer a future problem, it's a current problem. From wildfires in the Northwest, Maui, and southwestern Louisiana, to an unusually rainy New England summer and 110-degree coastal waters off of Miami, climate change is everywhere. Climate change refers to a long-term shift in temperatures and weather patterns, and it's mainly caused by human activities, especially the burning of fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas. While the Earth's climate has changed throughout its history, the current warming is happening at a rate that hasn't been seen in the past 10,000 years. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, quote, since systemic scientific assessments began in the 1970s, the influence of human activity on the warming of the climate system has evolved from theory to now established fact. Scientific information taken from natural sources such as ice cores, rocks, and tree rings, and from modern equipment like satellites and instruments, all show the signs of a changing climate. From global temperature rise to melting ice sheets, the evidence of a warming planet abounds. We already see effects scientists predicted, such as the loss of sea ice, melting glaciers, ice sheets, sea level rise, and more intense heat waves. Scientists predict that global temperature increases from human-made greenhouse gases will continue, and the severe weather damage that we've been getting will also increase and intensify. I felt that it would be important to invite in two local conservationists who can reflect on how climate change is impacting the South Shore, and particularly Kingston, and possibly what we can do about it. Our guests today are Matt Penella, who is the conservation agent for the town of Kingston, and Pine duBois, who's the executive director of the Jones River Watershed Association. Thank you both very much for being here. So how I would like, again, to open the discussion is just generally, before we dig deeper into the specifics, Matt, we could start with you, followed by Pine. How do you see global change generally affecting the South Shore and Kingston in particular?
Well, I think it's easy for anybody to say that the weather has changed, right? Everybody sees things are a little different than the way they remember them growing up. And following the news, you're hearing all the time that a particular day of the month is setting an all-time record for heat, at least as far back as we've been recording the heat. So you see that. What they described as far as storms, I think we're already seeing too, that storms are more frequent, they're more intense. So what we used to call as the 100-year storm, you're seeing that a lot more frequently than that, which is leading to a lot of local issues. So I think you're right that we are starting to see this on the landscape here, and it's not just theory anymore.
No, and on a regular basis. Yes, I almost caught in a tornado a couple of weeks ago, so on the way to Weymouth. So it's definitely scary, and it's happening. How about you, Pine? What would your general observations be?
Well, I'm fortunate to work on the Jones River. We have Jones River Landing, the boatyard on the estuary there. And we bought that in 2003. And since 2003, so 20 years ago, the astronomical high tide has risen a foot. So what does that mean to
Wow.
us is, Matt says it's, sea level is rising. Generally, people don't get down to the coast unless it's a beautiful sunny day and want to go swimming, right?
Right.
But we're there all the time, and when you have to deal many times a year with flooding inside the buildings, and you can't keep it dry, and I'm talking about feet inside the buildings. You put things up on chairs up on tables. You have computers and refrigerators jump into the water as it's going down. You learn a lot about water, and you learn that sea level rise isn't theoretical. It's extremely difficult to deal with. It is, although we're lucky because we're a mile and a half upstream of the bay, but we're not dealing with crashing waves and monstrous, things like that. But the surge that comes in when we have a northeaster, they're predictable, but it's impossible to really stay dry and protect everything. We in Kingston are a coastal community, and we have to begin to address the reality of that. Not just keep flooring your cars through those flooded streets, but actually slow down driving the cars, buy more, environmentally safe cars in terms of our emissions, and think about. I mean, Matt hit me today with you want to carpool over, but I was already in the vehicle, right? But we have to think about how we can reduce those emissions that we're responsible for. It's really important, I think, that we all take responsibility. We shoulder that responsibility for everything we do that's impacting the climate.
I get that, and we will definitely address that further on in the program in more detail like that. That's great. Wow, that is a takeaway. That's a visual, a foot higher in the last 20 years.
That's the calm high tide.
Wow.
That's the calm high tides. So you put a surge on top of that, so that you got your nor'easters.
Yeah.
When that nor'easter is coming at 20 miles an hour or higher, I know we're getting 2 feet or 3 feet of surge on top of that high tide. So that's the kind of thing that, but for me, it's, like I said, it's predictable. For somebody on the coast that's dealing with that velocity, not so much. That's why we're losing, shoreline, and we can't save it. We have to. We're not accustomed to, retreating.
Okay, so what I would like to do now, that we kind of have a sense of the overview, the big problem, is dig deeper and the individual impacts on our wildlife and the ecosystem around here. So first, the air quality. What would you say would be?
The air quality has been horrible. I mean, the Canadian fires and whatnot, very difficult for anybody with compromised respiratory issues. Very, very difficult. Very noticeable for me. I don't feel like I have a compromised respiratory, but my sinuses I couldn't get enough oxygen. I didn't like it. It affected me, and it's not. It's happened here before. I mean, we really have to understand that although it's been a wet August, it was a very hot July.
Right.
And, we do have some beautiful trees and open spaces that could catch fire pretty easily. And those are very hard to contain once you have that amount of, you have the pests that Matt was talking about and dead vegetation that, that's harder to contain than just a brush fire in your backyard.
Right. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, for years now we've dealt with air quality issues from Western and Canadian wildfires. And whether everybody really feels it in their lungs or not, I mean, it is affecting everybody, especially young people, older people, anybody that's compromised. But, the cause of all of that is driven by climate change, it's driven by invasive plants, it's driven by invasive insects or insects that are range expanding. And it's not really going away. It seems to just keep getting worse. At some point you figure, well, everything must burn out and then we can reset. But with the invasive plants filling the gaps every year and then drying out, it's just not the case. So that we're going to be dealing with. It highlights the importance of our local community, our local ecosystem, and making sure we have abundant trees, abundant green spaces. That's why we do a lot of what we do. It's not just about making a place for animals to live, although that's true. We should have healthy ecosystems around us. I mean, we breathe because of all of the plants that are around us, you know.
Can you explain that for
Sure,
those
yeah,
of
I mean,
us who are
you know, your
simple-minded?
average plant is, you know, taking the sun's energy and taking carbon dioxide out of the air, and one of its, you know, products that it puts out into the air as a result of that is oxygen. So, you know, you have more oxygen in the air around you when you live near abundant vegetation, and particularly trees. Not only that, but you have, you know, shading effects and cooling effects that you get from having a tree canopy. They call them heat island effects. When you have an area where it's more like a city, you have less tree cover, you have more blacktop, you have more radiant heat. You know, and it makes so much more sense to make sure that we're surrounded by trees. They're not just something that, you know, puts out an annoyance like leaves to clean up or acorns to clean up off your lawn. I mean, they're crucial not just for wildlife, but for us and our comfort.
Right. And, you know, from being that I have a health background, I've noticed a lot more people having asthma attacks, a lot of difficulty breathing with the humidity and the damp air, and as you said, the lack of oxygen. Yeah, definitely been an issue. Well, you alluded to this a bit, Pine. The water, the local water system, so our ponds, our rivers, the ocean, the impact. Let's start with that, and then its habitat. You know, the fish that are located in it. Matt, do you want to start with that, and we'll get into Pine? Because
Sure.
we know Pine will have a lot to say.
Yeah, she'll have plenty to say on this, I'm sure. I would say, in general, it's been bad. I mean, we've been modifying these aquatic systems for 400 years in the Northeast, and especially in Kingston. And particularly since the start of the Industrial Revolution, we've been heavily modifying them with concrete and completely blocking flow. And, you know, all of our stormwater systems for our entire roadway were basically made so that they just dumped all the stormwater off into wetlands or into the rivers and streams that run directly out into the ocean. So all of that contamination, lack of oxygen, it's lawns. I mean, suburbanization, the number of acres of lawn that you have now where everybody uses fertilizer, all that fertilizer, or a lot of it, runs off into the stormwater system, ends up in our natural wetlands, causes algae blooms. Septic systems, you know, septic systems have some capacity to run off, especially depending on the health of the system. So that's caused huge problems on Cape Cod, where their water quality is really poor because, like Kingston, they're sitting right on top of an aquifer, and you have all of these septic systems now leaching directly into the water that's used for the drinking water system. So add that to, you know, invasive aquatic plant species, invasive aquatic plants, fish declines. I mean, it's really bad. And again, that's what we've been trying to do, you know, between conservation commissions and local nonprofits, is try to get better, you know, connectivity for fish to get back where they're supposed to go, for improving the oxygen levels in the water, for limiting the amount of detrimental inputs like oil and all sorts of waste that ends up in the stormwater system and into our wetlands. So that's sort of why we do what we do, trying to get it better,
Right.
trying to rewind 400 years and get healthy wetlands that we can appreciate.
Wow. Fine.
I mean, I think it's important in Kingston for people to appreciate and understand that the DEP and EPA, two large, you know, agencies, classified the Jones River and Silver Lake all the way to the bay, the worst category under the Clean Water Act because of nitrogen. So when Matt says we're fertilizing our lawns too much, that's part of the problem, because people like their lawns green, so they heavy duty the nitrogen. Whereas what you want to see happen with the trees and the tree roots, that CO2 that's going into the soil will help make a healthy soil, because it eventually creates humus out of the soil, which is what you want to grow a healthy lawn. Mm-hmm. If you put all that fertilizer on there, you're going to be killing off everything. You're going to make the roots really tiny. And when the roots are tiny, they can't handle drought. If you have a long root that goes down into the soil, and you have pretty good soil because you're giving it humus, you're cutting the grass and you're leaving the clippings there. You're letting you have a compost, pile in your backyard, and you're taking that each year and you're spreading it around to help things grow. You're helping that CO2 to be absorbed into the soil, and you're eliminating the need to go to wherever and buy those bags of fertilizer that is actually running into the river and polluting it. And it's going to cost Kingston and its homeowners a ton of money when we try to figure out how we're going to control the nitrogen that's going there. Matt and I have been working together on the stormwater issues, and the town has been working on stormwater issues, but it's not just that. It has to be, if we were to do that everywhere, we might be able to solve the problem. We can't. It's about management. Sometimes it's governmental management, and sometimes, and I would say always, it's our management. So every single person that has control of anything has a responsibility to do it right.
What's in the water? The aquatic life. Obviously, there's a very, very serious water issue that impacts aquatic life. Do you want to speak to that? Or is it pretty self-evident?
Yeah, I mean, they call it eutrophication, when you have these nutrient inputs into the water, causes low dissolved oxygen. So, I mean, fish breathe just like us, they just do it differently underwater. Dissolved oxygen gets below a certain level, then nothing can live there anymore. You get algae blooms and different types of, things like that make it really difficult. The water's not clear, it's not clean, it's, looks disgusting, probably is disgusting for anything to try to live in that. That's a big problem. I think your average minor creek or stream, 400 years ago had a lot of life in it, and now when you go down and look in there, you're not going to see it in most cases. A lot of the little brooks that had trout in them, you're not really going to find much anymore, other than on systems where you may have a put and take fishery that the DFW goes and backs the trout truck up and drops them off. I mean, we're so far beyond having sustainable local fisheries in our inland waters that it's one of the things, again, that we're working really hard to get back, because right now it seems that, everything is not healthy.
The river?
And we are working to get it back. I mean, as bad as the river is, it's better than it was.
Right.
And so we do have native brook trout in the Jones River. And we are a classified cold water fishery because of the groundwater discharge into the river. But if we use up all that water and don't let any discharge, that's going to be a real problem. Right now, we're working together on getting a fish ladder installed in Brockton's Dam up at Silver Lake on Lake Street. That will be a huge benefit to the river herring and to the American eels, which are so important to people. People really don't understand that these fisheries, they're not just nice and they're not just edible. The herring feed the cod that we love to eat, right?
Right.
But they do important work, and what we've learned in our dismay about the aerial application for mosquitoes and whatnot was that those chemicals, the additives to the chemicals, will stay in the, when you aerial spray them, they settle. We have so much water here, they settle into the mud under the river, right? So it's the sediments in the river. And that's where the little eels live. But the little eels can outcompete any fish alive to eat mosquito larvae. So really, they're one of our best friends,
Nice.
right?
Yeah.
And we really want a healthy environment for them. We don't want to kill them off because we're scared that we don't know how to put the stuff on ourselves or on our kids.
Hey,
We
mosquitoes
need
are the
to-
next section, okay?
we need to self-protect, but they have. But the way we manage it has a big impact on the health of our systems,
Right.
and that's what we're trying to address by removal of the dams and removal of these things to get the fisheries back, because it's an ecosystem for a reason. It all works together
Together,
to
right.
make a healthy environment.
It's worth mentioning that this fishery and associated shell fishing in the bay and estuary were at one point likely world class, and there's a reason why colonists and various tribes settled along the Jones River and its estuary for the last probably, 15,000 years or so since the Ice Age receded. So it's important.
It's important. Well, getting to the mosquitoes and the insects. Matt, you want to lead us off?
Yeah, climate change has been driving northward range expansions for certain species of concerns. Lone Star ticks, for one, are something that's been really concerning, that have the capacity to make people really sick. They've been found in Cape Cod. They are a southern species. You have increased...
Yeah, that's pretty recent, isn't it?
The last 10, 15 years, 20 years.
Okay.
And there's
right
also
Tripoli
translocations where
West
who
Nile.
knows how they got here. I mean, maybe somebody happened to bring up something that had a bunch of them, and who knows. But other species, southern pine beetle, that's a southern species that can really decimate a pine forest really fast. And then the result after that is, increased heat getting at the soil level, increased risk of fire, things like that. They've been expanding northward. They've been found in Massachusetts now. I think last year they actually found a few small infestations on the islands, but I haven't got updates on that yet. But it really is driving a lot of different species moving that have the capacity to either make people sick or really heavily affect our environment around us. I mean, look at what gypsy moths do, for instance. I mean, between that and when you have invasive species or translocated species, you have things like spotted lanternfly, which is now, sort of spreading north from introductions into the United States down south. Asian tiger mosquito, right? It's something that's a really big public health issue. It's not a native species. It's something that was translocated over here. So we have all sorts of issues. More importantly, just as Pine mentioned, our relationship with mosquitoes and ticks and our reaction to them is really important, because I don't think everybody thinks about the unintended consequences of the treatments that they do. Between you have the state or counties that do what they do, but you have a private sector now that has really blown up in the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years, treating people's yards for mosquitoes and ticks. And in some cases, they're using things that are naturally derived essential oils. In other cases, it's generalist insecticides. And just with a mist blower going around and spraying them all over people's properties. There may be unintended public health risks to that we don't realize, but there's definitely, I think, fast forward, we're going to see huge ecological issues as a result of that. I mean, I talk a lot about, biodiversity and decline of species and how it's happening all around us. And we're not separate from it. We can't survive without the ecosystem around us. We aren't separated from it in any way. So it's really concerning to think that we're driving this decline in biodiversity by the way we treat our property out of a fear of mosquitoes and ticks and that. So it's just, like Pine said, we need to think about things and be intelligent about the way that we're protecting ourselves from those without having unintended consequences down the road for our kids and for our environment.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think there's another aspect to it in terms of that concern, and that is learn where they breed. So, and I was stunned to learn this, because I had been anti-sprayer for a long time. But when I found my, gutters not draining because, there was all this schmutz in the downspout, and I saw the tens of thousands of mosquito larvae in there, I was like, oh, I can't let this happen. Right? When I realized that my bird bath, which I love to see the birds in my yard and all that, so I have a bird bath and feeders. But when I realized that the mosquitoes love those things too, and I have to literally dump them 3 times a week to keep the mosquitoes under control. But I do. I mean, they're not going to grow in my fish pond because the fish are going to eat them, right? That's food for fish. But they're going to grow where there's no predator for them.
Right.
And it's astonishing how many can grow there, can breed there.
And there's really easy treatments
and
for
it's
that
easy.
too.
It doesn't take me long to dump it 3 times a week, but it takes it takes
them a little bit of effort.
You got to vacuum your room. You got to dump the
Right,
bird bath. You know what I mean?
Right,
It's
exactly.
part of what we should be doing to maintain our home. And fortunately, I can get on my roof and do all my gutters, but not everybody
But you
can.
do that, yeah.
So it's important that we figure out ways to take care of that and address that. That's not, hiring the guy to come and spray our yard because we're having a barbecue tonight.
Right.
But because it's killing off everything.
Right.
I mean, this summer, I don't know if everybody, but there were very few dragonflies. There were very few pollinators around other than the bees we had to rebuy because the beehives died. Mm-hmm. There were very few of those things that you love to see that goes, everything's alive and well. Right. Everything wasn't alive and well this
What
year.
about birds?
Well, insect declines are very well documented and a lot more concerning to people, a lot less concerning to people than they should be, because they are a building block for essentially the whole environment around us.
Right.
And when you talk about dragonflies, just really quickly, when you're spraying generalist insecticides, you're not just killing mosquitoes, you're killing their insect predators. Mosquito populations rebound within a week or two.
Right.
The predators, like a dragonfly, takes a year plus.
2 years.
So you're really limiting their predators, and they're bouncing back. Therefore, you need to just keep spraying. You get into a cycle where they have less natural predation.
Right. Wow. Just quickly, birds, I would imagine, go along this whole continuum. They're being impacted as well.
If you could guess, they're declining.
They're declining. We'll leave
Again,
it
very
at that.
well documented bird declines. As far as local effects, if you follow any wildlife rehabs on social media, you'll see certain species like this year, chimney swifts over the summer. We had a big heat wave. Chimney swifts build their nests using saliva to hold dirt together to stick their nests to essentially at the inside of a chimney now. And they can't hold up in that temperature, so their nests were falling, the baby's falling out, so wildlife rehabs this summer were inundated with baby chimney swifts, and that's just one little way that shows that birds and other wildlife, they're having a tough time with this increase in temperature.
Okay, Pine has already brought up a couple of different things, from mosquitoes to, and what to do with them, to water, but I guess right now, what I'd like to dig deep with, and you had mentioned earlier before we started, just very practical things we can all be doing to help to mitigate this, that climate change has to start someplace, and obviously the two of you are in a position to impact more to a degree than the average resident. However, we take direction from you, so things that you could mention to us that all of us can do on a regular basis would be helpful. Pine, you already spoke to mosquitoes and water, and any water, standing water that you have, eliminating that, looking at it, several times a week. What else would you have to say?
Well, I think we have to live more deliberately, right? We shouldn't be running our gas-fired engines, to run to the store 3 times a day or whatever, or even 3 times a week. We have to plan better. We need to plan our route so that we get more done, because it's such a huge cost. You think gas is expensive? You ain't seen nothing yet when it comes to trying to deal with the sea level rise stuff. You haven't seen anything yet. It's going to be through the center of town before you know it. And I'm not, they're discovering things all the time. So, people think, oh yeah, well that's down in the islands and all that stuff. No, sea level is rising faster where we are than almost anywhere in the world. And it has to do with the ocean currents, it has to do with the Gulf Stream, it has to do with all that hot water you were talking about coming up from Florida. Mm-hmm. It has to do with the oscillating current. And it has to do with the melting glaciers. And if those glaciers do melt and the current stops moving, we are running for our lives. And nothing you ever thought was important to you will be important to you, except your kids maybe,
Right.
you know, and your family.
Yeah.
And at the same rate, we're going to have likely a huge influx of people trying to move to
Trying
this
to get
region
here.
to get away from other parts that
Because
are
they're
already being
inundated.
affected by wildfire and natural
Right.
disasters.
Well, and I mean, the big question is now, where do you move? I mean, everyone's having issues now.
So you don't move. So, and I think that's something that I read recently. You know, there are studies now saying that small changes in your personal life can have more effect than people thought.
Right.
Everybody always
And
thinks
speak
everything
to
has to
those.
be these big sweeping changes to make any difference, but if a lot of people start to do little things differently, like just the way you manage your thermostat, right? Making sure your house isn't freezing cold all summer, just what you need. You know, having a company, you know, like Mass Save come out and make your house more efficient.
Right.
You know, electric appliances, things like that can help. The way, like Pine mentioned, vehicles, car idling. Like people who just park to eat their lunch somewhere and let their car idle the whole time. I mean,
drives me crazy.
there's huge, not just climate impacts to that, but local health impacts to that. If anybody hasn't looked up everything that happened with the whole Volkswagen clean diesel thing, a lot of people got sick. They noticed cancer clusters popping up because of those. So that just tied me into that.
Right.
You know, people having their engine idling a lot near you has a big effect on you. There's actually a state law that limits idling for more than 5 minutes. It was meant for city environments to keep people in cities healthier when you have a lot of deliveries and things. But if people locally can start to think about that and just shut your engine off when you don't absolutely need it to be on, that has a huge impact. Your food choices have a big impact. It's well documented that beef and corn are really impactful to the whole global environment. Palm oil. And I can't tell you how many times I'm in a supermarket or a store and I look at the ingredients on something. If it has palm oil, it's going back on the shelf because it's very well documented worldwide how it's not only contributing to climate change, but just decimating biodiversity. You have palm plantations that are sprawling everywhere because we don't pay attention to the ingredients in what we buy.
That's right.
Interesting. I
That,
didn't realize that.
you know, what we mentioned a little bit, how you manage your property. You know, lawn is not a good thing for the globe. It's just something that's made us feel comfortable for the last several hundred years that we feel has to be absolutely green and perfectly manicured and as big as possible. Well, it has a lot of negative impacts in all of the things we've discussed today. So minimizing the size of your lawn, planting native plants, having less impervious surface, less pavement, you know, getting your stormwater in the ground, things like dry wells instead of just letting it run off the driveway and not really knowing anything about where it goes. Don't bag your lawn. Just let it all go down in and build the soil up. I mean, there's so many things you can do just to make my property. We've lived there 8 years. In that 8 years, I've transitioned it into something amazing. I mean, I don't spend any money on my lawn. It's perfectly fine to walk around on. It just doesn't look like much. But the biodiversity of my property now is crazy. I have tons of native plants, pollinators. It's everything I wanted it to be. And I know that at least the outside portion of my yard is not contributing to decline of species the way it would if it was just a sheet of green grass.
Right, right.
Right, and I think that if we then take it to a neighborhood level and start working with our neighbors to minimize that impact, and you know, those individual actions will grow, and everybody will start to feel better, and we'll get better ideas for what to do next,
Right.
so that we can cope with it and can reverse it, because we have to reverse it. We can't just, you know, slow it down a little. We have to reverse it in order for the planet to be habitable for the next couple of generations.
And it's a whole lifestyle change. It's a
is.
whole lifestyle. And recycling, you know,
We have to get
into
way
our
better
way
at
about
that,
things.
and recycling has to get better. Every time I learn something new about PFAS, I just dissolve into, you know.
More about reusing and minimizing than relying on recycling. But you're absolutely right. It's a mentality change. It's our general mentality as a society has been have lawns, have air conditioners, build a bigger house,
Get enough
do
money to
whatever
buy
you want.
everything
I mean,
that I
so when
need.
you start talking about these types of things that I was just mentioning, some people will still look at you and roll their eyes and go like, okay. But it is what we need to start doing and start to change, you know, people's mindsets about this stuff if we want to have any chance of making a difference here, not only on climate change, but on supporting diversity around us. I mean, the whole pollinator discussion I think we've had before where, you know, once honeybees started having issues, everybody started paying attention. But honeybees are just, I mean, they're a species we brought over from Asia, essentially. We have a huge network of native pollinators here that need us to think differently about the way that we manage our properties.
Right. Well, thank you both. You've been tremendously informative, and as was mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, this is a serious problem, and it's the worst it's been in 10,000 years. And it's something we need to deal with now. It's not going away, as both of our experts mentioned. We have to deal with it for ourselves and for our children and future generations. So I know I certainly learned quite a few things today as to what to do as a resident and a human being on the planet, as to how to help deal with climate change in my own personal world, and I hope you did as well. So thank you again, both of you,
Thanks
for being
having
here
us,
today.
Janet.
Thanks for having
And
us.
take care, be safe, be healthy, and let's all work on climate change together.